Derek Kingsley's harsh laughter cut through the combined operations briefing room like a blade scraping metal. He leaned back in his chair, boots planted wide, staring at the laptop screen with undisguised contempt. "Yo, Fraser, check this out. Our admin here is reading SEAL insertion protocols like it's some kind of romance novel or something." Lieutenant Liam Fraser glanced up from the tactical map spread across the conference table, his Marine Corps dress uniform crisp enough to cut paper. His gaze drifted toward the corner of the room, where a slight female officer sat motionless at a portable desk, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and a single government-issue clipboard. She didn't look up. "Seriously?" Fraser pushed away from the table, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the entire space. "I guess operations is running short on admin staff. Had to send her down here. Probably figured joint training briefings just need someone who can type fast and make coffee." Around them, 15 people occupied the room. Army Rangers with their sleeves rolled to regulation height, Air Force tactical controllers studying satellite imagery, Navy communications specialists reviewing encrypted protocols, Marine logistics officers comparing supply chain data. A few frowned at the lieutenant's conduct. Several shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. The woman in question, appearing no older than 25, her frame small inside an Army combat uniform that seemed a size too large, simply made another notation on her clipboard. Her posture was parade ground perfect, spine straight, shoulders squared, hands steady. But in that moment, nobody in the room registered those details. Kingsley grinned, shoving his chair back with a screech of metal on tile. The sound echoed off the concrete walls of the operations center, jarring in its deliberate rudeness. "Hey, Lieutenant." He squinted at the name tape stitched across her uniform. "Archer, you actually understand what you're reading there? Or are you just copying stuff into a PowerPoint for your boss?" Willow Archer, if that was indeed her real name, didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set down her pen with a controlled, deliberate motion. When she closed the clipboard, the movement was precise, economical, the kind of efficiency that comes from muscle memory, repeated 10,000 times in high-stress environments. Then she lifted her gaze, and her eyes, a cold, assessing blue-gray, met Kingsley's without flinching. No anger flickered there, no defensiveness, just evaluation. But in the next 20 minutes, these two lieutenants would discover they'd just made the single biggest mistake of their brief military careers. Fraser crossed the room now, footfalls heavy with confident swagger. He positioned himself directly in Willow's line of sight, arms folded across his chest in a posture designed to intimidate. "I'm just saying, we've got actual operators trying to coordinate a real mission here. Maybe you'd be more comfortable back at headquarters, filing reports, scheduling meetings." His tone dripped with condescension, each word chosen to belittle. The briefing room at Joint Operations Training Center had been designed for exactly this kind of multi-service coordination. Flags from all four branches hung along one wall: Army, Navy, and Air Force Marines, silent witnesses to the interoperability doctrine that supposedly governed modern military operations. The space smelled of gun oil, strong coffee, and the peculiar electronic tang of too many encrypted devices running simultaneously. Outside the reinforced windows, Fort Bragg-style training facilities sprawled across North Carolina terrain, where the best of each branch came to learn how to work together. Except right now, two of those best were demonstrating the exact opposite of teamwork. Major Audrey Raymond, seated 3 rows back with a tablet showing Air Force tactical coordination data, set down her stylus with barely suppressed irritation. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the two lieutenants circle Willow, like wolves testing prey. Raymond had 14 years in service, multiple combat deployments, and zero tolerance for unprofessional behavior, but she held her tongue, for now. Staff Sergeant Ryan Foster, positioned near the back while in his Navy working uniform, studied the scene with growing interest. As a SEAL Team 3 operator, Foster had learned to read people the way others read maps, and something about the quiet woman being harassed wasn't adding up. The way she held herself, the absolute stillness of her hands, the controlled breathing pattern. These weren't the markers of someone intimidated. They were the markers of someone waiting. Technical Sergeant Rachel Minna, the Air Force documentation specialist assigned to record the briefing, kept her expression neutral but made careful notes on her laptop. This kind of conduct would need to go into the official record, regardless of rank. "All right, settle down." Captain Logan Cassian's voice carried authority despite his relative youth. The Marine logistics officer stood from his seat near the front, his expression disapproving. "Lieutenant Fraser, Lieutenant Kingsley, we've got a briefing to run. Maybe focus on that instead of giving our colleagues a hard time." Kingsley waved him off. "Relax, Captain. Just making conversation, getting to know the team." But his smirk suggested otherwise. He pulled a chair backward, straddling it like he owned the place, still watching Willow with that same mocking expression. "So, Lieutenant Archer, since you're here in our tactical briefing, maybe you can enlighten us. What do you actually know about special operations?" For 3 heartbeats, silence stretched across the room. Then Willow spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the concrete space. "Enough." Just that one word, clipped, professional, revealing nothing. Fraser laughed, a sharp, derisive sound. "Enough? That's your answer? Come on, give us something. Impress us with your admin expertise." But before Willow could respond, or choose not to, the briefing room door opened and a senior Air Force major entered, carrying a leather portfolio and an expression of barely controlled frustration. "Listen up, people. We've got a problem." The room shifted to attention, even Kingsley and Fraser straightening slightly in their seats. Major Harold Ringy set his portfolio on the main table with a heavy thump. "The joint operation we've been planning for the past 6 weeks, the one requiring seamless coordination between Army Special Forces, Marine Force Recon, Navy SEALs, and Air Force Tactical Controllers?" He paused, scanning the room. "It's falling apart. We've got 4 different branches using 4 different communication protocols, 3 separate insertion timelines that don't sync, and exactly 0 consensus on command structure once boots hit ground." Groans rippled through the assembled personnel. This was precisely the kind of interoperability nightmare that joint training was supposed to prevent. "So, we're going to workshop this, right now." Ringy pulled up a digital tactical map on the main display screen. "First problem. Maritime insertion requires SEAL expertise, but the Marine Force Recon team insists their protocols are superior for this particular terrain. Army Special Forces is pushing back on both approaches, and Air Force can't coordinate close air support if nobody agrees on timing. Thoughts?" Kingsley jumped in immediately, his earlier mockery replaced by earnest tactical enthusiasm. "Sir, with respect, SEAL protocols are designed for water operations. This target is inland, meaning Marine Force Recon doctrine makes more sense. We've got experience with—" "Actually," Willow's quiet voice interrupted, "the terrain in question features tidal river systems with significant current variations. Maritime insertion specialists would need to account for water speed fluctuations that standard force recon training doesn't emphasize. The SEAL approach isn't just water operations, it's hydrographic analysis." Every head in the room turned toward her. Fraser's expression shifted from surprise to irritation in seconds. "And you know this how, exactly?" Willow didn't break eye contact with the tactical display. "Published doctrine, basic hydrography, common knowledge for anyone who's studied insertion methodology." Kingsley leaned forward, his competitive instincts clearly triggered. "Okay, fine. You've read some manuals, but real operators know the difference between theory and practice. Fraser's got actual force recon experience. I've trained with Rangers who've done hundreds of insertions. You're talking textbook stuff." "Textbooks exist for a reason," Willow replied evenly. Her hands remained folded on the clipboard, relaxed but somehow ready. "They document what works, what keeps people alive." Fraser made a dismissive sound. "Yeah, well, books don't cover the real-world chaos, the split-second decisions, the improvisation required when your primary plan fails and you're operating on backup protocols in hostile territory with degraded communications." Willow's tone hadn't changed, still quiet, still professional. But now, there was something beneath it, something that made Staff Sergeant Foster's attention sharpen even further. "I'm aware that field conditions differ from controlled environments, Lieutenant." Major Ringy cleared his throat, cutting off Fraser's response. "Moving on. Second issue, communication protocols. We've got Army using one encryption standard, Navy using another, Marines on a third system, and Air Force tactical nets that don't interface with any of them. How do we solve real-time coordination when our radios can't talk to each other?" This time, several people spoke up simultaneously, each proposing different solutions. The discussion quickly devolved into a multi-service argument, with each branch defending its own systems. Willow waited until the voices died down, then spoke again. ANDVT. The room fell silent. Major Rinji tilted his head. Come again? Advanced Narrowband Digital Voice Terminal. It's the joint service standard specifically designed for cross-branch encrypted communication. Implementation requires coordination at the unit level, but the technology already exists, and most special operations teams have access. The issue isn't capability, it's willingness to adopt unified protocols. Kingsley stared at her. How do you know about ANDVT? That's not exactly common knowledge for... He trailed off, clearly catching himself before saying something even more dismissive. For admin officers, Willow finished for him, no inflection in her voice. It's in the unclassified portions of joint operations documentation, available to anyone with appropriate clearance who bothers to read interoperability standards. Fraser's jaw tightened. The woman wasn't just defending herself. She was systematically demonstrating knowledge that contradicted every assumption he'd made about her, and doing it without raising her voice or showing any emotional response to their earlier mockery. Before we continue with what happens next in this briefing room, I need you to do something important. If you're enjoying this story of underestimation and hidden authority, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who appreciate stories about respect, competence, and the moment when arrogance meets reality. And subscribe to the channel. We tell stories about silent warriors, hidden operators, and the moment the truth comes out. Because what's about to unfold in this room will make you realize that rank isn't always visible on a uniform. Major Rinji nodded slowly, processing Willow's suggestion. ANDVT would work, assuming we can get unit buy-in, but that brings us to the third problem, command structure. In a joint operation with elements from multiple branches, who has tactical command? We can't have 4 separate chains of authority. Joint Special Operations Command has established protocols for exactly this scenario, Willow said, her tone remaining conversational, despite the technical complexity. The officer with highest relevant expertise for the specific mission phase assumes tactical control, with clear transition points defined during mission planning. It's not about rank, it's about capability matched to current objectives. Kingsley couldn't help himself. Okay, seriously, where are you getting this stuff? You talk like you've actually participated in joint operations planning. For the first time, something flickered across Willow's expression. Not anger, not defensiveness, something closer to amusement, but it vanished so quickly that most people in the room missed it entirely. I pay attention during briefings, Lieutenant. You'd be surprised what you learn when you listen more than you talk. The subtle rebuke landed with precision. Fraser's face flushed slightly, while several other officers in the room struggled to hide smirks. Captain Cassian allowed himself a small, approving nod. But Kingsley wasn't ready to let it go. His ego, already bruised by the quiet woman's demonstrated knowledge, pushed him toward escalation rather than retreat. You know what? Fine. You want to play tactical expert? Let's see how deep that knowledge actually goes. He stood, moving to the display screen and pulling up a satellite image. Explain the difference between HAHO and HALO insertion methodologies. And I don't want textbook definitions. I want operational considerations. The room tensed. This was no longer professional discourse. This was a challenge, a test designed to expose perceived incompetence. Willow regarded Kingsley for a long moment, then set down her clipboard with that same deliberate precision. When she stood, her movements carried an economy of motion that suggested complete control of her body and space. She approached the display screen, studying the satellite imagery. High-altitude high opening versus high-altitude low opening, she began, her voice taking on a clinical quality. HAHO allows longer horizontal distance from release point to target, up to 40 kilometers in favorable conditions, useful when aircraft can't penetrate hostile airspace. Jumpers deploy parachutes immediately after exit, navigate using GPS and visual reference, conduct airborne coordination. Primary risk? Extended time under canopy makes detection more likely. Weather vulnerability increases. Team dispersion can compromise landing zone cohesion. She gestured toward specific terrain features on the satellite image. HALO, conversely, minimizes time under canopy, free fall to lower altitude, typically 3,000 to 5,000 feet, before a deployment, reduces detection window, concentrates team landing, but requires aircraft to penetrate deeper into potentially hostile territory. Higher physiological stress from rapid altitude change, less time for in-flight navigation adjustment. Kingsley's expression had shifted from smug confidence to something resembling confusion. That's actually correct. But you missed the part about oxygen requirements. I didn't miss it, Willow replied calmly. I prioritized operational considerations over physiological logistics, since oxygen systems are standard equipment for any high-altitude insertion, regardless of opening methodology. The meaningful operational difference is tactical positioning versus detection risk, not supplemental breathing equipment. Fraser jumped in, unwilling to cede ground. Okay, but that's still theory. Real jumpers know there are a dozen other factors. Equipment failures, weather changes, hostile fire during descent. Wind shear at altitude can shift a hey-ho team kilometers off course, if not compensated for real time, Willow interrupted, her voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge that made several people in the room sit up straighter. Emergency equipment failures during halo freefall leave approximately 60 seconds for corrective action before impact becomes unsurvivable. Hostile fire during parachute descent requires immediate evasive maneuvering that can compromise landing zone accuracy by 20 to 30%. And severe weather, specifically thunderstorm activity or icing conditions above 15,000 feet, can scrub either insertion method entirely, requiring fallback to ground infiltration or postponement. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more uncertain. Staff Sergeant Foster, still positioned near the back wall, found his gaze drawn to Willow's hands. In the better lighting near the display screen, he could see something he'd missed earlier. The calluses on her palms weren't the soft tissue of someone who spent their career behind a desk. They were thick, hardened, positioned exactly where weapon grips would create friction over thousands of hours of training. His eyes narrowed. Those weren't admin hands. Major Audrey Raymond leaned forward slightly, her earlier irritation at the lieutenant's behavior now mixed with genuine curiosity. The woman being harassed clearly possessed knowledge that went far beyond what her apparent junior status suggested, which raised an obvious question. What was someone with that level of expertise doing in an assistant operations officer position at a training facility? Captain Cassian caught Raymond's eye across the room, and they shared a brief, meaningful look. Something wasn't adding up. But Kingsley, either oblivious to the shifting dynamics or too committed to his confrontational approach to back down, pressed harder. All right, fine. You've memorized the manual. Congratulations. But let me ask you something more specific. What's the effective range of the Barrett M82 in sustained counter-sniper operations, accounting for environmental factors? Which variant? Willow asked immediately. Kingsley blinked. What? Which Barrett variant? The M82A1, the M82A1M, or the M82A3? Because effective range varies based on barrel length, mounting systems, and optics integration. And environmental factors is vague. Are you asking about wind deflection, temperature effects on propellant performance, altitude impacts on ballistic trajectory, or humidity influence on powder burn rates? Fraser made a derisive sound. Oh, come on. There's no way you actually know the differences between M82A1, effective range approximately 1,800 meters under ideal conditions, Willow recited, her tone flat and precise. M82A1M features improved muzzle brake and mounting rail system, extends practical accuracy to 1,900 meters. M82A3 incorporates full Picatinny rail and quick detach barrel, maintains 1,800-meter effective range, but improves field maintenance efficiency. All variants fire .50 BMG, muzzle velocity approximately 2,800 feet per second, effective against light armored vehicles and personnel up to 2,000 meters with skilled marksmen and appropriate optics. She paused, tilting her head slightly. But you asked about sustained counter-sniper operations, which introduces different variables. Barrel heating after repeated firing decreases accuracy by up to 15% after 20 rounds. Spotter-shooter coordination becomes critical beyond 1,500 meters. Environmental factors at extended range, especially wind speed above 10 miles per hour, can shift point of impact by more than 3 feet at maximum effective distance. So the real answer to your question is, it depends on mission parameters, shooter proficiency, support assets, and acceptable accuracy standards. The room had gone completely silent. Even Major Ringy was staring at Willow with undisguised surprise. Kingsley's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since the briefing began, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Fraser recovered first, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Lucky guess. You probably just read about it somewhere. I did read about it, Willow agreed, moving back toward her seat with that same economical grace. Reading is how people acquire knowledge, Lieutenant. You should try it sometime. The subtle burn drew quiet chuckles from several corners of the room. Technical Sergeant Minna didn't bother hiding her smile as she typed notes into her laptop. This entire exchange was going into the official record, and it was clear which party was demonstrating professional competence. But Fraser, his pride now thoroughly wounded, made the mistake of escalating instead of retreating. You know what? I think you're full of it. I think you've memorized some facts to sound impressive, but you don't actually understand combat operations. You've never been downrange, never had to make life or death decisions under fire. You're just another... Careful, Lieutenant. Major Raymond's voice cut through the room like a whip crack. She stood, her Air Force uniform bearing the ribbons of multiple combat deployments. You're about 2 seconds from conduct unbecoming. I suggest you remember where you are and who you're talking to. Fraser's jaw clenched, but he backed down slightly. Ma'am, I'm just saying that theoretical knowledge isn't the same as... No one claimed it was, Raymond interrupted coldly. But you've spent the last 15 minutes harassing a fellow officer based on assumptions about her competence. That behavior is unacceptable regardless of anyone's experience level. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am, Fraser replied stiffly. Lieutenant Kingsley? Clear, ma'am, Kingsley echoed, though his expression suggested he felt unfairly chastised. Raymond remained standing, her disapproval radiating across the room. Major Ringy, perhaps we should continue with the actual briefing objectives. Some of us have work to do. Ringy nodded gratefully, clearly relieved to move past the confrontation. Agreed. Let's talk about close air support coordination. Air Force tactical controllers, I need your input on... The briefing resumed, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Willow returned to her seat, picking up her clipboard and pen, as though the past 20 minutes hadn't happened. Her expression remained neutral, professional, unreadable. But those paying close attention might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the controlled breathing pattern of someone managing elevated stress through practiced discipline. Staff Sergeant Foster waited until the room's attention focused back on Major Ringy's presentation, then moved quietly along the back wall until he had a better angle on Willow. Something about her was triggering every instinct he'd developed through 8 years in naval special warfare. The way she held herself, the unconscious situational awareness, even now, absorbed in note-taking, she knew exactly where everyone in the room was positioned. The controlled emotional responses. And those hands. Foster had shaken hands with enough operators to recognize the specific pattern of calluses created by weapon manipulation under stress. M4 carbine grips left marks in particular places. So did pistol draws from tactical holsters. And the scar tissue barely visible on her knuckles suggested hand-to-hand training that went far beyond basic combatives. This woman wasn't admin. She was something else entirely. Captain Cassian had reached a similar conclusion. During a lull in the briefing, he leaned over to Major Raymond and whispered, "Ma'am, does Lieutenant Archer's assignment seem odd to you?" Raymond's eyes flicked toward Willow, then back to Cassian. "Extremely odd, Captain. I intend to look into it." The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering logistics coordination, medical evacuation protocols, and rules of engagement for the hypothetical joint operation. Throughout, Willow remained silent unless directly asked a question, and when asked, her answers were consistently accurate, detailed, and demonstrated understanding that went far beyond her apparent rank and position. Kingsley and Fraser, meanwhile, had lapsed into sullen quiet. The earlier mockery was gone, replaced by a simmering resentment that occasionally surfaced in muttered comments or hostile glances, but they'd learned enough to avoid another direct confrontation, for now. Finally, Major Ringy called for a 15-minute break. We'll reconvene to discuss contingency planning and alternate extraction scenarios. Stretch your legs, grab coffee, be back in 1-5. The room emptied quickly, most personnel heading toward the adjacent break area where government-issue coffee pots and vending machines offered minimal refreshment. A few remained behind, including Willow, who continued making notes on her clipboard. Staff Sergeant Foster approached casually, carrying a foam cup of truly terrible coffee. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Archer?" Willow glanced up, her expression polite but guarded. "Yes, Sergeant?" "I just wanted to say, that was good work in there, standing your ground against those two." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Takes guts to handle that kind of pressure without losing your cool." "Thank you, Sergeant, but I was simply answering questions." Foster nodded slowly, studying her face. "Right. Simple questions about advanced tactical operations, specialized weapons systems, and joint service protocols." His tone was conversational, but his eyes were sharp. "Where'd you serve before this assignment, if you don't mind my asking?" For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Willow's expression. Calculation, evaluation. Then it was gone, replaced by the same neutral professionalism. "Various locations, standard assignments." "Uh-huh." Foster took a sip of his coffee, made a face, but didn't pursue the topic. "Well, if you ever want to grab a beer off duty, talk shop, I'm around. SEALs don't have many secrets from each other, but we know how to keep other people's." The offer hung in the air between them, layered with unspoken meaning. Foster was extending an olive branch, signaling that he recognized something in her that the others had missed, offering discretion. Willow considered him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. Truly." As Foster walked away, Miss Willow returned to her notes, but her pen had stopped moving. She was thinking, calculating, wondering how much longer she could maintain this cover before someone with real operational experience, someone like Foster, pieced together the truth. The break ended, and personnel filtered back into the briefing room. Major Rinji resumed his presentation, moving into contingency planning scenarios. "All right, people, let's talk about what happens when everything goes wrong. Primary extraction fails, communications are compromised, and you've got hostiles closing on your position. How do you coordinate a multi-service extraction under combat conditions?" The discussion that followed was technical, intense, and revealed the deep complexity of joint operations. Different branches had different procedures, different training, different equipment. Making them work together seamlessly required not just technical knowledge, but cultural understanding, the ability to speak multiple military languages and translate between them in real time. Throughout, Willow continued to demonstrate expertise that should have been impossible for someone in her supposed position. When an Army Ranger proposed a particular extraction protocol, she quietly noted the incompatibility with Marine Air-Ground Task Force procedures. When a Navy communications specialist suggested a specific radio frequency plan, she pointed out the potential interference with Air Force tactical air control nets. Each contribution was quiet, professional, undeniably correct, and each one made Kingsley and Fraser more resentful. Finally, around 90 minutes into the ResMed briefing, Fraser snapped. Major Rinji had just posed a question about coordinating medical evacuation across service boundaries, and Willow had provided a detailed answer referencing tactical combat casualty care protocols and inter-service trauma registry systems. "Okay, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous," Fraser announced, loud enough to halt all other conversation. "We're supposed to be planning actual operations here, and we're taking tactical advice from someone who's probably never even seen combat. How is that productive?" Major Rinji's expression hardened. "Lieutenant Fraser, that's your second warning about conduct. There won't be a third." But Fraser was committed now, his frustration boiling over. "Sir, with all due respect, we don't even know what Lieutenant Archer's actual qualifications are. For all we know, she's fresh out of some staff college, never deployed, never led troops, never what, Lieutenant?" Willow's voice was still quiet, but something had changed in it. An edge had appeared, sharp and cold. Never had to make decisions under fire, never seen people die because of failed coordination, never spent 273 days in a combat zone wondering if today would be the day an IED turns your vehicle into shrapnel. The specificity of that number, 273 days, made several people in the room go very still. Fraser hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in Willow's demeanor. I didn't mean..." "You meant exactly what you said, Lieutenant. You assume that because I'm not broadcasting my credentials, because I'm sitting quietly and doing my job, that I must be incompetent, inexperienced, unworthy of respect. Willow stood now, and there was something different about her posture. The careful neutrality had cracked, just slightly, revealing something harder beneath. You know what real operators don't do? They don't announce their achievements. They don't demand recognition. They just do the work. In high-stakes military environments, communication security isn't optional. It's survival. That's why special operations units rely on military-grade encrypted devices that prevent signal interception and location tracking. These ruggedized communication systems feature end-to-end encryption, burst transmission capabilities, and anti-jamming technology. For professionals who need absolute security, whether in tactical operations, corporate negotiations, or sensitive legal matters, these devices ensure your conversations stay private. With satellite connectivity and EMP-resistant hardware, they function even when conventional networks fail. When compromise isn't an option, encrypted military-spec communication is the standard. The room had gone completely silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different, heavier, more dangerous. Kingsley, sensing his fellow lieutenant losing ground, attempted to regain control of the situation. Look, nobody's questioning your dedication. We just think that maybe someone with more hands-on experience should be leading these tactical discussions. More hands-on experience, Willow repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. Like yours, Lieutenant Kingsley? How many deployments do you have? 1? 2? Kingsley's face flushed. It's a simple question. How many times have you deployed to combat zones? Once, Afghanistan, 8 months in Kandahar province. His defensive tone suggested he knew where this was going. Willow nodded slowly. Kandahar? 2013 to 2014 time frame? How did you... Yes, 2013. FOB Pasib or Kandahar airfield, Kingsley hesitated. Airfield. But we conducted regular patrols. I'm sure you did. Willow's tone wasn't mocking, but neither was it impressed. And Lieutenant Fraser, your combat experience? Fraser's jaw tightened. Marine Corps deployment to Iraq, 2015, 7 months. Al-Assad Air Base? Yes. The admission came reluctantly. Both of you served honorably, I'm sure, Willow said, her voice returning to that careful, neutral tone. But let's be clear. You spent your deployments on major forward operating bases, conducting routine operations under established security conditions. You followed procedures created by people who'd already done the hard work of figuring out what keeps troops alive. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's important work that needs to be done. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had dropped even quieter. But don't confuse executing established procedures with expertise in designing them. Don't mistake tactical experience with strategic understanding. And for the love of everything that matters, don't assume that someone who doesn't advertise their background lacks one. The rebuke landed with devastating precision. Both lieutenants stood there, faces burning, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. Major Raymond allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The quiet officer had just systematically dismantled both men's credibility without raising her voice or violating any regulation. It was a masterclass in professional dominance. Captain Cassian leaned back in his chair, reassessing everything he thought he knew about Lieutenant Archer. That level of tactical knowledge combined with that level of emotional control suggested training that went far beyond standard officer development. Staff Sergeant Foster's suspicions crystallized into near certainty. He'd worked with enough special operations personnel to recognize the pattern, the quiet confidence, the refusal to self-promote, the specific detailed knowledge that came from actual participation rather than academic study. And most tellingly, the controlled way she'd just demolished those 2 lieutenants while maintaining perfect professional bearing. This woman wasn't just experienced, she was elite. Major Rinji cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. I think we're done for the day. This briefing is clearly not productive right now. Lieutenant Kingsley, Lieutenant Fraser, you'll both report to Colonel Anderson at 0800 tomorrow morning. I'm documenting this incident in my after-action report, and I expect you will be receiving counseling on professional conduct. Sir, Kingsley began. Dismissed, Lieutenant, both of you. The 2 men gathered their materials in stiff silence, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. As they headed toward the door, Fraser muttered something under his breath, too quiet for most people to hear, but not quiet enough to escape Willow's notice. Is there something you'd like to say, Lieutenant Fraser? Her voice stopped him mid-step. Something you'd like to contribute to the official record? Fraser turned, his expression hostile. I said this whole situation is... He caught himself just before saying something that would absolutely result in disciplinary action. Frustrating, ma'am. Very frustrating. I can imagine, Willow replied evenly. Having your assumptions challenged is always difficult, but it's also how we grow, how we learn. I hope you'll take the opportunity to reflect on today's lessons. The condescension, delivered so politely, so professionally, was the final humiliation. Fraser's hands clenched into fists, but he had enough self-control left to simply nod stiffly and leave. Kingsley followed, the door closing behind them with a heavy thunk. As soon as they were gone, the remaining personnel seemed to collectively exhale. Several exchanged glances, a few whispered to neighbors. The atmosphere shifted from tense confrontation to buzzing speculation. Major Ringy approached Willow's desk. Lieutenant Archer, I apologize for their conduct. That was completely unacceptable. No apology necessary, sir. Every unit has members still learning professionalism. That's generous of you. Ringy studied her face, clearly trying to reconcile her apparent junior status with the expertise she demonstrated. If you don't mind my asking, what's your actual specialty? Your personnel file was somewhat vague. Operations coordination, sir. Multi-service integration and interoperability assessment. Right. Ringy's tone suggested he recognized that as a non-answer. Well, your coordination skills are clearly exceptional. If you have time, I'd like to discuss some of the issues you raised about communication protocols, privately. Of course, sir. Happy to assist. As Ringy moved away to begin shutting down the display systems, Major Raymond approached. Lieutenant Archer, a word? Ma'am? Raymond gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. When they were relatively isolated, she spoke quietly. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate an honest answer if you can give one. Are you actually assigned to this facility in an administrative capacity? Willow met her gaze steadily. I'm assigned to Joint Operations Training Center as an Assistant Operations Officer, ma'am. That's what my orders say. That's not what I asked. A long pause stretched between them. Then Willow gave the faintest smile, the first genuine emotion she'd shown all day beyond controlled irritation. I understand your question, ma'am, but some assignments come with restrictions on disclosure. I'm sure you've had similar situations in your career. Raymond nodded slowly, understanding dawning. I see. Well, Lieutenant, whoever you actually work for, they're lucky to have you. You handled that situation with more grace than I would have. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from someone with your experience. As Raymond walked away, Staff Sergeant Foster took the opportunity to approach again. Ma'am, I don't suppose you'd be willing to share which operations you participated in during those 273 days in theater. Classified, Sergeant. Figured as much. Foster grinned. But just for my own curiosity, you ever work with SEAL teams? In any capacity? Willow's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a hint of amusement. I've coordinated with Naval Special Warfare on occasion. Coordinated, right. Foster's grin widened. Well, ma'am, if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you've got friends in the community. I'll make sure the word gets around. I appreciate that, Sergeant, truly. The briefing room gradually emptied as personnel departed for other assignments. Captain Cassian paused at Willow's desk on his way out. Lieutenant, I should have said something earlier, when those two started harassing you. I apologize for not intervening sooner. You did intervene, Captain, when it mattered. That's all anyone can ask. Still, should have been quicker about it. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I think there's a lot more to your story than you're letting on. And I respect that. Whatever you're doing here, whatever your actual mission is, good luck. Thank you, Captain. Finally, Willow was alone in the briefing room. She sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the notes on her clipboard without really seeing them. The confrontation with Kingsley and Fraser had been manageable, but it had also been revealing. She'd shown more of her capabilities than intended, which meant her cover, thin to begin with, was now even more compromised. Staff Sergeant Foster clearly suspected something. Major Raymond definitely knew something was off. Even Captain Cassian, despite his professional discretion, had recognized that her presence at JOTC didn't match her apparent role. The mission, assess interoperability readiness for an upcoming classified joint operation, was still viable, But it was getting complicated, and complicated missions had a way of deteriorating rapidly. Willow closed her clipboard with a soft snap, gathered her materials, and stood. Time to file her daily report. Time to document that 2 junior officers had failed the basic test of professional conduct and mutual respect. Time to note that the facility's culture needed significant work before it could support the kind of high-stakes operations she was evaluating it for. But as she walked toward the door, a small part of her mind was already calculating the next moves. Kingsley and Fraser wouldn't let this go. Men like them never did. They'd been publicly humiliated, their competence questioned, their assumptions challenged. Pride would drive them to retaliate somehow, which meant the real test was still coming. Willow stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, the North Carolina heat pressing against her skin. Across the training facility, she could see various exercises in progress, rifle ranges crackling with controlled gunfire, obstacle courses challenging soldiers' endurance, tactical driving courses testing split-second decision-making. This was what she'd signed up for, not the glory, not the recognition. Just the quiet work of making sure that when warriors went downrange, they had every possible advantage, every protocol refined, every procedure tested, every potential failure point identified and mitigated. It was unglamorous work, often frustrating, sometimes dangerous in ways the public never understood, but it mattered, and that was enough. Willow adjusted her uniform, checked her watch, 16:47 hours, and headed toward the operations building, where she'd write her report. Behind her, the briefing room stood empty, its walls having witnessed a confrontation that would ripple through the facility for weeks to come. And in that empty room, on the display screen that nobody had bothered to turn off, satellite imagery of distant terrain glowed softly, training scenarios, hypothetical operations, the endless preparation for missions that might never happen but had to be ready nonetheless. Somewhere in the world, real operators were conducting real missions based on protocols refined in rooms exactly like this one, making life-and-death decisions informed by the kind of detailed analysis that people like Willow provided, trusting that the procedures would work because someone had done the unglamorous work of testing them, challenging them, improving them. That was the real victory. Not the confrontation with 2 arrogant lieutenants, not the small satisfaction of demonstrating superior knowledge. The real victory was every operator who came home alive because someone had taken the time to get the details right. Willow disappeared into the operations building, leaving the afternoon sun to paint long shadows across the training grounds. The day's drama was over, but the mission continued. The emergency drill alarm screamed to life at exactly 1700 hours. 3 sharp bursts of sound that cut through every conversation on base like a chainsaw through silence. Red warning lights strobed in the hallway outside the operations building, where Willow had just settled into writing her daily assessment report. She didn't flinch, didn't startle, just set down her pen with the same controlled precision she brought to every movement and waited for the announcement. "Exercise! Exercise! Exercise!" the loudspeaker blared. "All personnel, this is a simulated hostile infiltration scenario. OP4 has breached perimeter security at checkpoints 3 and 7. All training units respond per your assigned protocols. This is a drill. I repeat, this is a drill." Through the window, Willow watched organized chaos erupt across the facility. Army Rangers sprinted toward defensive positions. Marines formed tactical columns. Air Force security forces deployed to critical infrastructure points. Navy personnel secured communications equipment. The multi-service coordination that had been discussed theoretically all day was now being tested practically, and like most first-run exercises, it was already falling apart. Willow grabbed her clipboard and moved swiftly toward the Combined Operations briefing room, which was now serving as the drill command center. Inside, she found controlled pandemonium. Major Ringy stood at the main display, trying to track 4 different service responses simultaneously. Colonel Samuel Anderson, the senior Army officer she'd seen briefly earlier, had arrived and was attempting to impose order on the chaos. "Somebody get me a status update from Checkpoint 7, Anderson barked. "I need to know if OPFOR is simulating armored vehicles or just dismounted infantry." "Sir, Marine elements are requesting close air support but can't get through to the Air Force Tactical Controller," a junior officer reported. "Navy communications are saying their encrypted channel is being jammed by the exercise parameters," another voice called out. Army Quick Reaction Force is moving to intercept, but they don't have current OP4 location data. Willow moved to an unused console, logged in with credentials that made the system pause momentarily before granting access, and pulled up the exercise control feed. Within seconds, she had a complete picture of the scenario. Simulated hostile forces advancing from two directions, each service branch responding independently with minimal coordination, communication breaking down across the joint force, and, most critically, nobody in unified tactical command. This was exactly the kind of failure her evaluation was designed to identify. Lieutenant Derek Kingsley burst through the door, slightly out of breath, followed closely by Lieutenant Liam Fraser. Both had clearly been off duty when the alarm sounded, now scrambling to participate in the exercise. Their eyes immediately found Willow at the console, and matching expressions of irritation crossed their faces. "Sir," Kingsley addressed Colonel Anderson, "2nd Platoon is ready to deploy. What are your orders?" Anderson barely glanced at him. "Stand by, Lieutenant. We're still establishing command and control." Fraser moved closer to the main display, studying the tactical situation. "Sir, if I may, Marine doctrine for this scenario would be to establish a forward screen while—" "Lieutenant Fraser, I'm aware of Marine doctrine," Anderson interrupted sharply. "Right now I need solutions that work across all four branches, not individual service responses." The rebuke stung, and Fraser's jaw tightened. His gaze shifted to Willow again, watching her work the console with fluid efficiency. When she pulled up a multi-layer tactical display that integrated all four service positions, his expression darkened further. "How does she have access to that?" Fraser muttered to Kingsley, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Willow ignored the comment, focusing instead on the problem at hand. The exercise scenario was accelerating. OP4 forces were now simulating a coordinated attack on the facility's communications center, which would cripple joint operations if destroyed. Response time was critical. "Colonel Anderson," Willow's quiet voice somehow carried through the chaos, "Sir, recommend immediate implementation of PACE communications protocol. Primary channel is compromised per exercise parameters, but alternate and contingency frequencies are still viable. Emergency channel provides last-ditch coordination." Anderson looked at her sharply. "Lieutenant Archer?" "Sir, PACE, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. Standard special operations protocol for maintaining communications under degraded conditions. If we shift all elements to alternate frequencies right now, we can restore coordination within 2 minutes." "Do it," Anderson ordered immediately. "Major Ringy, coordinate the frequency shift. Lieutenant Archer has tactical communications." Fraser's face flushed red. "Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't that responsibility go to someone with actual field experience?" "Lieutenant Fraser, are you questioning my judgment?" Anderson's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "No, sir, but—" "Then I suggest you make yourself useful elsewhere. Now!" Fraser retreated, but the resentment burning in his eyes was unmistakable. Kingsley placed a hand on his fellow lieutenant's shoulder, both of them watching Willow coordinate the communications shift with practiced ease. Within 90 seconds, all four service elements had successfully transitioned to alternate frequencies. Voice traffic resumed, coordination improved, and the joint response began to cohere into something resembling unified action. "Marines, this is command," Willow spoke into the tactical net with calm authority. "Shift your forward screen to grid 379er423. OP4 is advancing from northwest, not north. Army elements will provide flank security. Army QRF, redirect to checkpoint 7. You have friendly forces already engaged. Recommend split element, half to reinforce, half to interdict second OP4 column. Air Force, we need your tactical controller to coordinate with Marine Forward Air Controller. They're using different target identification systems. You'll need to translate between formats in real time. Navy, your communications team needs to establish a relay point for encrypted traffic. Current direct transmission is being simulated as jammed, but bounce relay through the alternate node will work." Each instruction was precise, professional, and exactly what was needed. The response across the joint force shifted from chaotic to coordinated within minutes. Personnel who had been operating blindly now had clear direction. The exercise scenario that had been spiraling toward failure suddenly stabilized. Colonel Anderson observed this transformation with growing interest. He'd been at JOTC for 2 years and had never seen a junior officer coordinate multi-service operations with this level of competence. Certainly not under pressure. Certainly not during their first major exercise. "Lieutenant Archer," Anderson said quietly, moving closer to her console, "where exactly did you learn joint tactical coordination?" Willow's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. "Various assignments, sir. You pick things up. You don't just pick up this level of proficiency." Before Willow could respond, the scenario escalated again. Exercise control injected a new complication: simulated casualties requiring medical evacuation, testing whether the joint force could coordinate case-evac procedures across service boundaries. "Multiple casualties reported at Checkpoint 7, the loudspeaker announced. "Exercise scenario includes 1 urgent surgical, 2 priority, 3 routine. Medical assets must coordinate for evacuation and treatment." The room tensed. This was where joint operations typically broke down completely. Each service had different medical evacuation procedures, different prioritization systems, different protocols for coordinating with higher-level trauma facilities. Willow didn't hesitate. "Colonel Anderson, sir, recommend I take tactical command of CASEVAC coordination. This scenario requires someone who can speak all 4 service medical languages simultaneously." Anderson studied her for a long moment. Something in her tone, the quiet confidence, the assumption of capability, triggered a warning bell in his mind. This wasn't a junior officer requesting permission. This was someone accustomed to command testing, whether he'd recognize her authority. "Granted," Anderson said slowly. "You have tactical control of medical evacuation operations." Willow immediately shifted into high gear, her voice carrying across the tactical net with unmistakable command presence. "All elements, this is Overwatch. I have tactical command of case-evac operations. Acknowledge." 4 separate confirmations came back. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, each recognizing her authority without question. Lieutenant Fraser's head snapped up. "Overwatch?" he whispered to Kingsley. "That's not a call sign in the exercise roster." Kingsley's frown deepened. "And since when does a lieutenant take tactical command over multiple service elements?" But neither man spoke up, not yet. They watched instead, trying to understand what was happening. Willow coordinated the medical evacuation with surgical precision. She directed the Army medevac helicopter to the urgent surgical case, routed Navy corpsmen to stabilize the priority casualties, positioned Marine security elements to protect the evacuation site, and had Air Force communications relay real-time patient data to the receiving medical facility. Within 8 minutes, all simulated casualties were en route to treatment, coordinated across 4 different service medical systems without a single procedural conflict. The personnel in the command center watched this performance with varying degrees of shock. This wasn't competent coordination. This was mastery. Staff Sergeant Ryan Foster, who'd been observing from the back of the room, felt his earlier suspicions crystallize into certainty. He'd seen this level of multi-service command exactly once before, during a classified operation in Syria, where a JSOC officer had coordinated Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Navy SEALs, and Air Force combat controllers in a single integrated strike package. This woman wasn't evaluating JOTC's interoperability training. She was testing whether they were ready for actual joint special operations. The exercise scenario reached its climax. All 4 forces had been repelled, casualties evacuated, communications restored, and facilities secured. Exercise control called Index, end of exercise, and the simulated threat environment collapsed back into normal training operations. "Index, Index, Index," the loudspeaker announced. "All personnel secure from exercise. Unit commanders prepare for after-actions review at 1900 hours." The command center erupted in relieved chatter. Personnel began shutting down systems, comparing notes, discussing what went right and wrong. The general consensus was clear. After a rough start, the joint response had come together impressively. Someone had taken charge and made it work. That someone was now calmly logging out of her console, gathering her clipboard, preparing to fade back into administrative obscurity. But Lieutenant Fraser wasn't willing to let that happen. "Okay, I'm done with this," Fraser announced loudly, striding toward Willow's position. "I want answers. Right now." Willow turned to face him, her expression neutral. "About what, Lieutenant?" "About who you actually are. About what you're really doing here. about why you just coordinated a multi-service operation like you've done it 1,000 times before. Fraser's voice rose with each sentence, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Nobody just learns that kind of thing from various assignments. So either you're going to tell us the truth or what, Lieutenant? Colonel Anderson's voice cut through Fraser's tirade like a blade. You'll do what exactly? Fraser whirled to face the colonel. Sir, with respect, don't you think it's strange that some lieutenant we've never heard of just took tactical command of an entire joint operation? Don't you want to know what her actual qualifications are? Anderson's expression was unreadable. I know exactly what I need to know about Lieutenant Archer's qualifications, Lieutenant Fraser. What I'm questioning right now is yours. You've spent this entire day harassing a fellow officer, undermining unit cohesion, and demonstrating a concerning lack of professional judgment. Sir, I'm not harassing anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about... You're making accusations based on your own insecurity, Anderson interrupted coldly. And you're doing it publicly, which makes it my problem. So, here's what's going to happen. You and Lieutenant Kingsley are going to... The sharp crack of a door being kicked open interrupted Anderson's sentence. Two A4 role players, wearing distinguishing armbands marking them as simulated hostiles, burst into the command center, weapons raised. Exercise continues, one of them shouted. Command center is compromised, all personnel against the wall, now. Confusion rippled through the room. Exercise control had called Index. This wasn't supposed to be happening, but the O4 personnel were clearly still in character, treating this as an ongoing scenario. Major Rinji moved toward the O4 team leader. There's been a mistake. Exercise control called Index 5 minutes ago. New scenario injection, the O4 player replied. Exercise control authorized. Hostile infiltration of command center. All personnel are now simulated hostages. Comply or be marked as casualties. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. Sometimes exercise control extended scenarios beyond the announced index to test how personnel responded to unexpected developments. It was frustrating and disruptive, but part of realistic training. Personnel began moving toward the wall as directed, some grumbling about the confusion, others accepting it as part of the exercise environment. All except Willow. She remained exactly where she was, standing near her console, completely still. Her eyes tracked the two A4 players with the kind of focused intensity that professional hunters develop. Her weight had shifted, subtly, barely perceptibly, into a balanced stance that could transition to movement in any direction instantly. Staff Sergeant Foster noticed. So did Colonel Anderson. Ma'am, one of the OP4 players addressed Willow, moving toward her. You need to comply with the scenario against the wall. Exercise control didn't authorize this, Willow said quietly. Yes, they did. Now move. No. The single word was delivered without heat, without aggression, just flat refusal. The O4 player, sorry sir, a sergeant with several years of experience running training scenarios, frowned. Ma'am, I don't want to mark you as a casualty, but if you don't comply, call exercise control, Willow instructed. Right now. Verify that this scenario extension was actually authorized. Ma'am, call them, Sergeant, because if this wasn't authorized, then you've just created a major safety violation by introducing weapons into a space that isn't properly cleared for live training. The OP4 player hesitated, clearly thrown off his script. Something about the quiet woman's absolute certainty made him reconsider. He keyed his radio. Exercise control, this is OP4 Team 2, requesting confirmation of scenario extension at Building 7, Command Center. Static. Then a confused voice. OP4 Team 2, negative. Index was called at 1723. No extensions authorized. What's your location? The OP4 player's face went pale. Building 7, Command Center. We thought we received authorization to... Negative, Team 2. You're not supposed to be there. Clear the building immediately and report to exercise control for debrief. A terrible silence filled the command center. The OP4 players looked at each other, then at their weapons, blank-firing training rifles, but still dangerous if mishandled, then at the room full of personnel they'd just ordered around based on faulty information. How did you know? Fraser asked Willow, genuine confusion replacing his earlier hostility. Because exercise control follows protocols, Willow replied calmly. Scenario extensions require warning to command elements. Safety briefings for any weapon introduction, proper clearance of the space. None of that happened, which meant either exercise control had made a catastrophic safety error, unlikely, or these two received incorrect information. The Op 4 players were already backing toward the door, stammering apologies. As they left, Colonel Anderson turned to Willow with undisguised interest. "Lieutenant Archer," he said slowly, "that was impressive situational awareness. Most people would have simply complied rather than question the scenario. Most people aren't responsible for ensuring training safety, sir." "No," Anderson agreed. "They're not." Before the conversation could continue, Lieutenant Kingsley, frustrated by being sidelined, stung by the day's repeated humiliations, and driven by stubborn pride, made a catastrophic decision. He moved directly into Willow's personal space, close enough to be intimidating, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know what? I've had enough of this. You've been playing games all day, acting superior, showing off. But you still haven't told us who you actually are, or what gives you the right to take command of anything." "Lieutenant Kingsley," Colonel Anderson's voice carried a warning tone. "Step back, right now." But Kingsley was too committed to retreat. "Sir, with respect, we have a right to know who we're taking orders from. We have a right to know if someone claiming tactical authority actually has the credentials to—" "I said step back, Lieutenant." Fraser joined his fellow officer, the two of them forming a wall of masculine aggression. "Colonel, we're not trying to be insubordinate. We just want transparency. Is that too much to ask?" Willow remained perfectly still, watching both men with those cold, assessing eyes. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "I suggest you follow the Colonel's instructions." "Or what?" Kingsley challenged. "What are you going to do? File a complaint? We're just asking questions. If you're sitting there thinking, where is this going? Stay with me. Hit that like button if you want to see how this plays out. The next few minutes are going to shift everything these lieutenants thought they knew. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment when authority reveals itself in the most unexpected way." "Last warning," Anderson barked. "Both of you, stand down." But Fraser reached out, placing a hand on Willow's shoulder, not violently, but firmly, attempting to physically move her aside. "Listen, we're not trying to—" What happened next occurred in less than 2 seconds. Willow's hand came up, executing a precise joint lock that reversed the pressure on Fraser's wrist. He yelped, more from surprise than pain, stumbling backward. Kingsley moved to intervene, grabbing Willow's other arm, and suddenly both lieutenants were entangled with her in a confused scuffle near the console desk. Personnel around the room surged forward to separate them. Voices shouted. Hands grabbed at uniforms. In the chaos, someone's elbow caught Willow's shoulder. Fabric tore, a sharp ripping sound audible through the commotion. And then everything stopped. Absolute frozen silence descended on the command center like a physical weight. Because Willow's uniform sleeve had torn completely at the shoulder seam, exposing her upper arm and shoulder, and there, marked permanently into her skin in dark ink that had clearly been there for years, was a tattoo that made every military professional in the room go completely still. A trident. Not just any trident, the 3-pronged symbol overlaid with an anchor, an eagle that marked naval special warfare. But this version was different, modified, surrounded by 4 smaller symbols representing Army, Marines, Air Force, and Navy. And beneath it, in precise lettering, Unity Command, below the tattoo, scarring. Extensive patterned scarring that created a topographic map of trauma across her shoulder and upper arm. The distinctive blast pattern of an IED explosion. Shrapnel entry points, surgical scars from field trauma treatment. This wasn't the shoulder of an administrative officer. This was the shoulder of someone who'd been in combat. Real combat. The kind that left permanent marks. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Staff Sergeant Foster gasped audibly. "Holy cow!" Major Audrey Raymond's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. Captain Logan Cassian stood immediately to attention, his face draining of color. Lieutenant Derek Kingsley and Lieutenant Liam Fraser stood frozen, their hands still hovering near Willow, where they'd been trying to grab her, stammering attempts at words dying in their throats. But the most dramatic reaction came from Colonel Samuel Anderson, his eyes locked on the tattoo. The Unity Command scroll, the 4 service integration symbols. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, and his entire body snapped to parade rest automatically, then shifted to full attention. His right hand came up in the sharpest salute he'd delivered in 20 years of service. Ma'am, Anderson's voice shook slightly. Captain Archer, I... I didn't realize... The title hung in the air like a detonation. Captain, not lieutenant. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Heads swiveled. People stared. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he just say captain?" Willow, Captain Willow Archer, reached up to adjust her torn uniform, her expression still calm despite the revelation. "Colonel Anderson, I'd appreciate if you didn't stand on formality. We're all working together here." "Ma'am, that's... I can't..." Anderson struggled to find words. "That tattoo, Unity Command, that's a JSOC designation, Joint Special Operations Command Integration Officer. You're not assigned here as admin. You're conducting an evaluation, Colonel." "Yes." Willow's voice remained quiet, but now the authority behind it was unmistakable. "This facility is being assessed for readiness to support classified joint operations. My role was to observe how personnel interact across service boundaries under normal conditions." She glanced at Kingsley and Fraser, both of whom looked like they were about to be sick. "Unfortunately," Willow continued, "normal conditions have revealed some significant cultural problems that will need to be addressed before this facility can be certified for the kind of high-risk operations my command is planning." Major Rinji pulled out his phone with shaking hands, accessing personnel databases. His face went white as he read. "Captain Willow Archer, JSOC Operations Officer, Joint Forces Authority Designation, reports directly to Special Operations Command. Security clearance level..." "Oh my God, that's SCI with special access programs." The information rippled through the room like a shockwave. Personnel pulled out their own devices, searching databases, confirming the impossible truth. The quiet woman they had watched being harassed all day wasn't a junior officer. She was one of the most senior special operations coordinators in the entire military. Technical Sergeant Rachel Minna sat motionless, her hands frozen over her laptop keyboard. Every word of today's confrontations was documented in her notes. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment of harassment directed at an officer who could literally command operations across all 4 service branches. Staff Sergeant Foster approached slowly, coming to attention and rendering a sharp salute. "Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Ryan Foster, SEAL Team 3. It's an honor, a genuine honor." Willow returned the salute precisely. "At ease, Sergeant. You were in Kandahar Province during the winter of 2018, weren't you?" Foster's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. How did you..." "The Helmand Province extraction operation. February 5th, 2018. 40 coalition forces trapped behind enemy lines after a compound collapse. Someone coordinated simultaneous Army helicopter insertion, Marine ground assault, Navy SEAL tactical support, and Air Force close air support in a single synchronized operation under zero visibility conditions." Willow's voice was matter of fact. "That was my coordination, Sergeant. Your team was part of the SEAL element." Foster's face showed pure shock. "Ghost Actual. You're Ghost Actual, the officer who ran that entire operation from... We never saw you. Never knew who coordinated it. They told us it was classified beyond our clearance level." "It still is, Sergeant." Willow smiled slightly. "But I remember every person who came home because we got the details right, including your team." Around the room, understanding spread like wildfire. This wasn't just some senior officer. This was someone with a combat record, someone who had saved lives, someone who'd coordinated operations at the highest levels of special warfare. And 2 lieutenants had spent the entire day treating her like an incompetent secretary. Colonel Anderson was on his phone now, speaking urgently to someone, presumably higher command. His expression cycled through shock, embarrassment, and profound concern. When he hung up, he turned to Kingsley and Fraser with an expression that promised nothing good. "Both of you, outside, immediately." The 2 lieutenants stumbled toward the door like men walking to their executions, which, in career terms, they probably were. As they passed Willow, Fraser tried to speak. "Ma'am, we didn't... If we had known..." "If you had known, you would have treated me with respect." Willow's voice was soft, but cut like a surgical blade. "The problem, Lieutenant Fraser, isn't that you disrespected someone of higher rank. The problem is that you disrespected a fellow officer based entirely on assumptions about gender and appearance. That behavior is unacceptable, regardless of who your target is." Fraser's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "And for the record," Willow added, "the only reason you're not facing more serious charges is that this evaluation specifically tested how personnel respond to perceived authority gaps. You failed that test spectacularly, but failure is educational. I suggest you learn from it. Kingsley found his voice, though it came out strangled. Ma'am, there's no excuse for how we behaved. We were completely out of line. Yes, you were, Lieutenant. Willow's expression softened slightly. But you're also young officers still learning. The question is whether you learn from this or let it define you. I hope you choose the former. Colonel Anderson physically stepped between his failed lieutenants and Captain Archer. Ma'am, I cannot apologize enough for the conduct you experienced today. This is unacceptable at every level, and I take full responsibility for the culture that allowed it. Colonel, you intervened appropriately when the situation escalated, Willow replied. Nobody expects perfect behavior from every individual. What matters is how leadership responds to problems. You responded correctly. That's generous, ma'am. More generous than the situation warrants. Perhaps. Willow's gaze swept across the room, taking in every face, every expression of shock and dawning understanding. But the purpose of this evaluation isn't to punish individuals. It's to identify systemic issues before they cost lives in actual operations. Today revealed that JOTC has cultural problems regarding respect, assumptions about competence, and willingness to challenge unprofessional behavior. Those problems are fixable, but only if we acknowledge them honestly. Major Audrey Raymond approached, her earlier confidence replaced by something closer to awe. Ma'am, I should have intervened earlier. When those two started their harassment, I should have shut it down immediately instead of waiting. I apologize. Major, you did intervene, when it mattered most. That demonstrates good judgment under pressure. Willow paused. And for what it's worth, your tactical coordination during the exercise was excellent. You have strong instincts for multi-service operations. Raymond stood a little straighter. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot, coming from you. Captain Cassian stepped forward next. Ma'am, I failed in my duty to maintain professional standards in that briefing. I should have been more forceful in stopping their conduct. I have no excuse. Captain, you spoke up. You attempted to de-escalate. Sometimes that's all anyone can do. Willow glanced toward the door where Kingsley and Fraser had been escorted out. The real test is whether we create an environment where speaking up is supported and reinforced. That's a leadership challenge for all of us. The room had settled into a strange atmosphere, part shock, part embarrassment, part fascination. Personnel who had witnessed the day's events were now processing them through an entirely different lens. The quiet woman who had endured mockery with such grace wasn't a victim. She was an evaluator, a test, and the facility had largely failed. Military personnel and government contractors face unique financial challenges, frequent relocations, deployment cycles, and specialized benefit structures. That's why veterans and active duty service members increasingly turn to specialized financial advisors who understand VA benefits, TSP optimization, and military pension planning. These services help navigate complex scenarios like combat zone tax exclusion, SBP decisions, and security clearance impacts on investment options. For those transitioning from military to civilian careers, strategic financial planning ensures your service translates to long-term security. Whether managing hazard pay, understanding TRICARE supplements, or planning post-service income streams, specialized military financial services provide the expertise you've earned. Colonel Anderson returned to the command center after ensuring Kingsley and Fraser were secured in a separate office under watch. His expression was grim. Ma'am, I've contacted the facility commander. General Morris is en route. He'll want to speak with you directly about today's events and their implications for your evaluation. Understood, Colonel. Willow checked her watch, 1832 hours. I'll need to complete my incident report before he arrives. Of course. Ma'am, if I may ask, how much of today's confrontation was planned as part of your evaluation? None of it was planned, Colonel. I was genuinely here to observe normal operations and assess readiness. The harassment wasn't anticipated. It was simply revealing. Willow's expression turned thoughtful. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from unscripted moments. People reveal their true character when they think nobody important is watching. Anderson nodded slowly. And your conclusion about JOTC's readiness? Needs significant cultural improvement, before this facility can support the kind of operations I'm evaluating it for. Willow's tone was professional but firm. The technical capabilities are present, the procedural knowledge exists, but the cultural foundation, mutual respect, trust across service boundaries, willingness to listen to expertise regardless of its source, that needs work. I understand, ma'am. We'll implement immediate corrective action. I'll include recommendations in my final report. Willow turned to her console, beginning to gather her materials. For now, I need to document today's events while they're fresh. As she worked, personnel gradually dispersed, returning to their duties but clearly processing the revelation. Conversations buzzed in hallways and offices throughout the facility as word spread. The quiet lieutenant everyone had dismissed was actually a JSOC captain with authority that exceeded most colonels in specialized operations contexts. Staff Sergeant Foster remained behind, waiting until most others had left before approaching again. Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, why maintain the cover identity once things started going badly? You could have revealed your rank at any point and shut down the harassment immediately. Willow looked up from her report. Because real operators need to work in environments where authority isn't always visible, Sergeant. Where you have to coordinate with people who don't know your background, don't trust your expertise, and may actively resist your leadership. If JOTC personnel can't maintain professional standards with someone they perceive as junior, how will they perform in the field when a legitimate junior officer, maybe someone who really is fresh out of staff college, needs to provide critical intelligence or technical expertise? Foster absorbed this, nodding slowly. You were testing whether people respect the position and the competence, not just the rank. Exactly. And unfortunately, the facility failed that test, but failure is educational. Willow smiled slightly. The question now is whether the lessons stick. They will, ma'am. I'll make sure of it. Foster's expression turned serious. The SEAL community doesn't forget when someone coordinates an operation that brings our brothers home alive. If you need anything, and I mean anything, word will get around. You've got friends in naval special warfare. Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know. Foster saluted one final time and departed, leaving Willow alone in the command center. She worked steadily for the next 40 minutes, documenting the day's events with clinical precision. Every interaction, every moment of harassment, every systemic failure that had allowed unprofessional conduct to persist. But also every moment of competence, every person who'd tried to intervene. Every small sign that the facility's personnel, despite their cultural problems, possessed the raw capability to support high-level operations. Her report would be honest, unflinching, but also balanced. At 1900 hours exactly, General Marcus Morris arrived at the command center. A 3-star with decades of joint operations experience, Morris had personally requested Willow's evaluation of JOTC because he trusted her judgment implicitly. He took one look at her torn uniform, the exposed tattoo still visible, and his expression tightened. Captain Archer, I've received preliminary reports about today's events. Are you all right? Fine, sir. Nothing I haven't handled before. I don't doubt it. Morris accepted the tablet she handed him, scanning her incident report with increasing displeasure. This is disappointing. I'd hoped JOTC had moved past this kind of behavior. The behavior came from specific individuals, sir, not the institution as a whole. Several personnel attempted to intervene. Others demonstrated excellent professional judgment throughout. Your report notes that, yes, but it also notes systematic failures to challenge unprofessional conduct, cultural acceptance of gendered assumptions about competence, resistance to authority that doesn't fit expected patterns. Morris set down the tablet. Your bottom-line assessment? Willow chose her words carefully. The facility has the technical capability to support joint special operations, sir. The procedural knowledge is strong. The coordination systems work when properly implemented. But the cultural foundation needs reinforcement before I'd recommend deploying teams here for high-stakes mission preparation. How long to fix it? That depends on leadership commitment, sir. Immediate policy changes, mandatory training, and visible consequences for violations. Maybe 3 months to establish new norms. 6 months to verify they're holding under pressure. Morris considered this. The operation we're planning can't wait 6 months. No, sir. Which means you'll need to make a decision about acceptable risk. Or find an alternate facility. Also an option, sir. Morris paced the length of the command center, thinking through implications. Finally, he turned back to Willow. Your recommendation, if you were in my position, what would you do? Split the difference, sir. Use JOTC for technical training and procedural coordination. They're excellent at that. But conduct the cultural sensitive portions, team integration, trust building, stress testing of command relationships, at a facility with proven track record, maybe brag or damn neck. That fragments the training pipeline. Yes, sir. But it mitigates the risk of cultural friction, compromising team cohesion during actual operations. Willow pulled up a map on the console. The mission you're planning requires absolute trust across service boundaries. Zero hesitation when non-standard authority structures emerge. Complete confidence in expertise regardless of source. JOTC can get you 80% there. For the final 20%, the part that makes or breaks high-risk operations, you need environment that's already proven it can handle exactly these challenges. Morris studied the map, then nodded slowly. I hate splitting pipelines, but I hate failed operations more. He looked at Willow with undisguised respect. You're absolutely right. We'll use JOTC for what they're good at and supplement elsewhere for the cultural components. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You're the one who identified the problem before it cost lives. Morris's expression hardened. What about the 2 lieutenants, the ones who harassed you? Recommend Article 15 proceedings, sir. Non-judicial punishment for unprofessional conduct and failure to maintain military bearing. Mandatory counseling and ethics retraining. Formal letters of reprimand in their permanent files. Not court-martial? The behavior was unacceptable, sir, but not criminal. They're young officers who made serious mistakes. The question is whether we use this as a teaching moment or end their careers. I advocate for the former. Morris raised an eyebrow. You're being remarkably generous to people who spent an entire day making your life difficult. I'm being strategic, sir. Destroying careers over recoverable mistakes doesn't serve the institution, but creating consequences severe enough to ensure lessons stick and visible enough to deter others, that serves everyone. Fair point. Morris made a note on his own tablet. I'll ensure Colonel Anderson implements appropriate punishment. And speaking of Anderson, he reported that you conducted yourself with exceptional professionalism throughout, maintained cover despite significant provocation, coordinated multi-service operations flawlessly when circumstances required. His assessment is that you demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need at JSOC. Willow allowed herself a slight smile. Thank you, sir. Colonel Anderson is a solid officer. This facility is lucky to have him. He said the same about you. Morris checked his watch. I need to brief the facility commander on your findings. You're done here unless you need more time for documentation. No, sir. My report is complete. I'll submit final recommendations by 0800 tomorrow. Outstanding. Captain Archer, thank you for your service, as always. My pleasure, sir. We're at the breaking point now. If you're feeling that anticipation building, that's exactly where you should be. Smash that like button and subscribe, because what happens in the next 5 minutes will be the payoff you've been waiting for. The truth is about to come out in a way no one in that room is prepared for. General Morris departed, leaving Willow to finish her documentation. But as she worked, Colonel Anderson returned with an update that shifted the atmosphere once again. Ma'am, I've completed preliminary counseling with Lieutenants Kingsley and Fraser. Both are devastated. Both fully acknowledge their failures. And both requested the opportunity to apologize to you directly, if you're willing to accept. Willow set down her pen. Bring them in, Colonel. Anderson stepped into the hallway, returning moments later with the 2 lieutenants. They looked wrecked, faces pale, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. The swagger and arrogance from earlier had evaporated completely, replaced by genuine shame. Both came to rigid attention, rendering salutes so sharp they could have cut glass. Ma'am, Kingsley's voice shook slightly. Captain Archer, I want to apologize for my conduct today. There is no excuse, none, for how I behaved. I disrespected you, I disrespected your service, and I violated every principle of professional military bearing. I'm sorry. Deeply, profoundly sorry. Fraser spoke next, his voice rough with emotion. Ma'am, everything Lieutenant Kingsley said applies to me as well. My behavior was inexcusable. I let my ego, my assumptions, my prejudices override my professional judgment. You deserved respect from the moment you entered that briefing room, and I failed to show it. I'm sorry, ma'am. I will spend the rest of my career trying to be better than I was today." Willow studied both men for a long moment. Then she returned their salutes crisply. "At ease, gentlemen." Both relaxed slightly, though tension remained visible in every line of their bodies. "I appreciate your apologies," Willow said quietly, "and I believe you were sincere, but I want you both to understand something. This wasn't about me. I can handle harassment. I've been dealing with it my entire career. What concerns me is that your behavior reflects assumptions you will carry into other situations. Assumptions about who deserves respect, who possesses expertise, whose input matters. Those assumptions can get people killed in combat." Both lieutenants nodded, absorbing the critique without attempting to defend themselves. "So, here's what I need from you," Willow continued. "Don't just apologize. Change. Examine the assumptions that led to today's failures. Challenge your own biases. And most importantly, when you see similar behavior in others, speak up. Intervene. Be the leader you wish you'd been today." "Yes, ma'am," they responded in unison. "You both have potential. I saw that in moments throughout the day when you weren't busy trying to prove something. The question is whether you'll develop that potential into genuine leadership or waste it defending your egos." Kingsley swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we won't waste it. I promise you." "I hope not, Lieutenant. I genuinely hope not." Fraser hesitated, then asked quietly, "Ma'am, is there anything we can do? Any way to, I don't know, make this right?" "Learn from it," Willow replied simply. "And when you're senior officers someday, when younger troops look to you for examples of how to behave, remember this day. Remember how it feels to be on the wrong side of professional conduct, and make sure the next generation does better." "We will, ma'am. I swear it," Willow nodded. "Dismissed, gentlemen, and good luck with your careers." The two lieutenants saluted one final time and departed, leaving only Willow and Colonel Anderson in the command center. "That was remarkably compassionate, ma'am," Anderson observed. "Most officers in your position would have pushed for maximum punishment." "Maximum punishment doesn't always produce maximum learning, Colonel. Sometimes mercy is more effective than justice." Willow gathered her materials. "Besides, those two aren't bad people. They're just young and inexperienced and carrying assumptions they've never examined. That's fixable." "I hope you're right, ma'am." "So do I, Colonel. So do I." The gap between military expertise and civilian credentials can cost veterans thousands in lost opportunities. That's why forward-thinking service members use military skills translation services and accelerated degree programs designed for operators. These programs convert your specialized training, from tactical operations to intelligence analysis, into accredited certifications and degrees. Many offer credit for military experience, flexible scheduling for active duty, and direct pathways to high-demand civilian roles. Whether you're transitioning to federal law enforcement, corporate security, or private sector leadership, the right educational bridge transforms your service record into competitive advantage. Because your experience has value, you just need the credentials that prove it. Over the following week, consequences cascaded through JOTC in precisely measured waves. Immediately, both Kingsley and Fraser received Article 15 non-judicial punishment, formal reprimands, loss of pay, and mandatory counseling. Their upcoming promotions were indefinitely postponed. Their security clearances were flagged for review. Within 72 hours, word had spread throughout the facility and across the broader military community. The story of two lieutenants who'd harassed a JSOC captain became a cautionary tale told in officer training courses, NCO professional development sessions, and informal mentorship conversations. "Don't be like Kingsley and Fraser" became shorthand for avoiding assumptions about competence based on appearance. By week's end, Colonel Anderson had implemented new anti-harassment protocols, mandatory bias training for all personnel, and clear reporting procedures for professional conduct violations. Major Rinji established oversight mechanisms to ensure compliance. The facility's culture began to shift, slowly but noticeably. Personnel started challenging inappropriate comments more quickly. Senior leaders demonstrated zero tolerance for gendered assumptions about capability. The change wasn't complete, but momentum was building. Captain Cassian received a commendation for his attempts to intervene during the initial confrontation, along with coaching on being more assertive when witnessing violations. Major Raymond was noted for sustained professional excellence and offered opportunities to lead cross-service training initiatives. Staff Sergeant Foster became an informal ambassador, sharing Willow's story with other special operations personnel as an example of quiet professionalism under pressure. Technical Sergeant Minna's documentation of the events became a case study in professional conduct training, showing both what not to do and how to properly respond to violations. Throughout the week, Willow completed her evaluation, submitted comprehensive recommendations, and prepared to move on to her next assignment. But on the 7th day, as she packed her few belongings from the temporary quarters she'd occupied during the assessment, her encrypted phone vibrated with an unusual ringtone. Mission-specific, classified, urgent. She answered immediately. Archer. The voice on the other end was female, authoritative, carrying the weight of command that came from years of high-stakes operations. Captain, we have a situation. The Kandahar team is requesting you personally. They've got 3 targets, 2 windows of opportunity, and 0 margin for error. Willow checked her watch, 20:07 hours. Time frame? Wheels up in 6 hours. C-17 departing Dover at 0200. This one's voluntary, but they specifically asked for the officer who doesn't exist on paper. Willow glanced at her torn uniform, folded carefully on the desk. The exposed tattoo had been covered again, but the memory remained. The team from 2018? Affirmative, they remember. Package includes liaison work with British SAS and French GIGN. Full Joint Forces authorization required. Multinational, multi-service, high-complexity operation. Background noise on the call included Arabic chatter and the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. Active theater, real-world conditions. 3 targets, 2 windows, Willow repeated, processing the tactical implications. Simultaneous or sequential. Sequential with overlap potential. Primary target moves as at 0430 local. Secondary 12 hours later. Tertiary, dependent on primary results. Intel confidence is moderate, 60 to 70%, which is why they want someone who can coordinate adaptive responses in real time. Willow moved to her gear bag, always packed, always ready, and verified contents. Body armor, communications equipment, medical supplies, documentation for 6 different cover identities, everything she might need for rapid deployment into uncertain conditions. Asset availability, she asked. British have an SAS squadron on standby. French GIGN team is already in-country conducting parallel operations. American forces include Delta, Rangers, and SEAL elements. Air Force has AC-130 on station for close air support. You would be coordinating approximately 80 personnel across 4 national forces. Rules of engagement, standard counterterrorism protocols, minimize collateral damage, verify targets before engagement, priority on capture over kill when feasible. Willow made her decision in less than 3 seconds. Tell them Ghost Actual is inbound, and remind them, I don't do easy. If that moment hit you the way it hit everyone in that briefing room, show it with a like. And here's the thing, this story isn't over. There's more to Captain Archer's background, more about that phone call, more about what JSOC has planned. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch the next chapter. The voice on the phone allowed herself a rare chuckle. They know, ma'am. That's exactly why they asked for you. Transportation is inbound to your location. Helicopter ETA, 20 minutes. You'll be briefed en route to Dover. Understood? Archer out. She disconnected, then immediately began final preparations. Her evaluation report for JOTC was already submitted. Her temporary quarters were already cleared. Within 12 minutes, she was standing outside the operations building in full deployment kit, watching the night sky for incoming rotary wing aircraft. The helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, a Black Hawk with minimal markings, flown by pilots who asked no questions and offered no small talk. Professional, efficient, exactly what the mission required. As the aircraft lifted off, Willow took one final look at the Joint Operations Training Center below. The facility where she'd spent a week being underestimated, harassed, and challenged. The place where 2 young lieutenants had learned painful lessons about assumptions and respect. The command centered her where her identity had been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. All of it was receding into darkness now, becoming just another chapter in a career filled with moments that would never make official records. Just another test passed, just another mission completed. But as the helicopter banked east toward Dover Air Force Base, toward the waiting C-17, toward whatever complex international operation awaited her in Kandahar, Willow allowed herself a moment of reflection. The work she did, coordinating multinational special operations, integrating forces that spoke different languages and followed different procedures, creating the precision teamwork that made impossible missions possible, it wasn't glamorous. Most people would never know her name, never read about the operations she enabled, never understand the complexity of making warriors from 4 different countries work as a single cohesive unit. But those warriors would come home. Those missions would succeed. Those targets would be neutralized, those hostages rescued, those threats eliminated. And that was enough. The helicopter's crew chief handed her a tablet with preliminary intelligence on the Kandahar operation. She studied it methodically, already building mental models of how to coordinate British special forces with American Delta operators, how to integrate French tactical approaches with U.S. procedures, how to ensure that 80 different personalities with 80 different training backgrounds could function as one unified force. 3 targets, 2 windows, 0 margin for error. Exactly the kind of challenge she'd spent her entire career preparing for. Far below, at JOTC, Lieutenant Derek Kingsley sat in his quarters writing a letter to his sister, explaining his mistakes, describing his humiliation, committing to being better. The letter would never be sent, some things were too personal to share, but the act of writing it helped him process the hardest lesson he'd ever learned. In the adjacent building, Lieutenant Liam Fraser reviewed the professional conduct regulations he'd violated, marking passages, taking notes, building a framework for understanding how he'd failed and how to prevent future failures. He wouldn't sleep that night, wouldn't eat, would just study and think, and gradually reconstruct his understanding of what it meant to be a leader. Both men had been humiliated. Both had failed spectacularly, but both were learning, growing, changing. And in some remote corner of the world, because of lessons people like them learned from people like Willow Archer, future warriors would work together more effectively, would trust each other more completely, would succeed at missions that required perfect coordination across impossible differences. The Black Hawk's turbines roared through the night sky, carrying Captain Willow Archer toward her next assignment, toward the team that remembered her from Kandahar, toward 3 targets and 2 windows, and the kind of operation that existed only in classified briefings and encrypted communications. Her phone buzzed one final time, a message from Staff Sergeant Ryan Foster. "Ma'am, heard your wheels up for something classified. Whatever it is, bring them home safe. SEAL community is counting on you. We always do." Willow typed a brief response. "That's the mission, Sergeant. Always has been." She pocketed the phone, closed her eyes, and allowed herself 60 seconds of rest before beginning the deep operational planning that would occupy her for the next 6 hours of flight time. Because somewhere in Kandahar, a team of warriors was waiting for the one officer who could coordinate their impossible mission, the officer who didn't announce her credentials, who didn't demand recognition, who just did the work. The ghost actual, the officer who doesn't exist on paper but makes everything possible in practice. And as the helicopter disappeared into the darkness, heading toward rendezvous with a C-17 that would carry her halfway around the world, one truth remained absolute. Real warriors don't seek glory. They seek mission success. They seek the quiet satisfaction of bringing everyone home alive. They seek the knowledge that when the impossible needed to happen, they made it possible. Everything else was just noise.